we're going to look at something called market failure, the beginning of it anyway. And I'm going to do it first of all by looking at this question of classifying goods, and even before that, I'm going to look at what happened to buffalo in North America. In 1800, apparently, it's estimated that there were about 60 million buffalo or bison, and that's about 4 times the human population at the time. 100 years later, there were only about 400 left. So the question here is what happened to them, and that's kind of what I want to look at in this lecture today. Why did the number collapse from 60 million to 400? Incidentally, if you ever have the opportunity to travel to Western Canada, I guess in the Western United States too, you'll see these stones everywhere, and there's like many of them. This is like over 100 years later. These were caused by buffalo that were itchy in the springtime. They would go up and run against these stones. They're everywhere. There would have been many, many more 100 before. When I first saw them, I was kind of intrigued. I thought it was some kind of a geological formation, but in fact, it's just due to the number of buffalo that existed at the time. Incidentally, now there's about 20,000 buffalo. They're either on private farms or in state parks. If you're interested, very good film to watch is Dances with Wolves. It was made in 1990. And it was filmed on a farm in South Dakota. There's a guy that had buffalo. There's a scene in the movie where there's a buffalo hunt, and it gives you a bit of an idea of what it was like in the West with all these millions of buffalo roaming. In any event, I want to look at how to go about classifying goods in order to answer this question about the buffalo, the disappearance of the buffalo, and at the same time get a handle on the concept of what we call in economics market failure, when markets don't work properly. So how to go about classifying goods? Well, first distinction, an obvious one, is when we refer to a good in economics, we just mean some kind of a good or service. Good is tangible, a service is something that's intangible. I think we've already talked about this in the course a little bit. But there are many other ways of classifying a good. For example, sometimes a good is referred to as a commodity. I use the term as a real resource. Note that that's not the same thing as a nominal resource. A nominal resource is, at least this is one of the key concepts, is the distinction between real and nominal. Nominal is just like money, which is just paper. And that's not a real resource. It's not real. So when we're talking about a good here, we mean a real resource, something that it's either tangible or a service like a haircut that you provide some utility for you. Money provides utility, but not in the sense of a real resource. A generic term for this would be commodity. Now, there's other ways of distinguishing goods. For example, a perishable good. For example, milk. I mean, it's relevant as opposed to non-perishable good, like a pencil. You can store a pencil, keep it for a long period of time, and it's still good. With milk, it can't be. This changes, of course, the way that the good is sold, how people go about choosing to purchase it, and so on and so forth, how they use it. Another big distinction between goods I find interesting is something called an experiential goods versus a search good. Experiential good is one in which you have to use it to know whether you like it or not. So like a movie. Until you've watched the movie, you don't know if it's a good movie. So it's kind of a different way of looking at the good as opposed to what's called a search good. Give an example, hammer, nails, or something in which you can do research and find out whether the good product is good before you purchase. You can ask friends and so on. But if they think of something like a phone, until you've used the phone for a period of time, you don't really know whether you like it or not. You can ask friends for their advice. You can try it out. A movie, though, is a better example of an experiential good because literally, it's until you've seen the movie, you don't know whether you like it. I use this term as signaling good, in which people purchase the good in order to say something about themselves. Thorstein Veblen created this idea called conspicuous consumption. But you might think of something like a brand of beer. People sometimes choose the beer that they drink because of what it says about them as a person. So that's like a signaling good, quite apart from whether they like the beer or not. An important distinction in international trade theory is whether the good is tradable or not. An automobile can be shipped across borders, so that's considered a tradable good. But think of something like a sandy beach, a sunny beach. It's non-tradable. Cuba can't export their sun to us. We have to go to Cuba to enjoy or Mexico to enjoy the warm sun. So that's non-tradable good. It's another distinction. Later in this course, we're going to see this very important distinction in macroeconomic theory is the difference between what's called an intermediate good and a final good. And that becomes relevant in looking at the big picture of an entire economy. Another big distinction we'll see is the difference between a consumption good and an investment good. I think this is one of the other key ideas we'll see later as well in the course. In any event, today, what I want to look at is specifically two questions about whether a good is excludable or not excludable. And then the second concept is the good rivalrous or not rivalrous? Now, these are two concepts that you're probably unfamiliar with, and so that's why I'm going to spend a bit of time on looking at both of them because they're relevant to this whole question of buffaloing and market failure. The issue of excludability, whether a good is excludable or not, is a bit easier to handle. So I'll start with that one, and then we'll look at the issue of the question of rivalrousness. Unfortunate choice of word. This is fairly standard now. This terminology that I'm providing is about 50 years old, but it's fairly standard terminology. Excludability refers to the idea of whether you can, if you have a good. Whether you can exclude somebody or you have access to a service, you can exclude somebody from using it. So it's closely tied to the idea of property law. So can you in effect exert a property right over this particular good, this particular thing, whatever it happens to be, this commodity? So, for example, if you have a chocolate bar, can you prevent somebody from stealing it from you? Or if you own a chalet in the north, can you prevent somebody from using it, particularly when you're not there? So, in the case of I found this photograph. It made me laugh a little bit. If you ever lived in shared an apartment with other people, and you often have within the fridge, you got different shelves for your food. How do you prevent somebody from using your food? And there's rules on this kind of thing. And clearly, you have a roommate that gets up in the middle of the night and eats some of your food, and you're upset about it. But this is directly connected to this notion of excludability. Now. And when we say easily define ownership, well, how easy is it to do it? You have to do something like lock your ice cream up. This is clearly going to be a question of, technology. In the case of a chalet, you can put maybe a hidden camera up to photographs, but then that requires that you have some kind of police service that will, if you see somebody breaking into your chalet, the police service will go and catch the guy. So it's a legal question, and then a lot of it's just custom. It's habit, tradition. In some societies, the respect of people's other property is well defined. In other places, it's considered that you can easily share it. So excludability is connected to all of these issues. Even the notion of property law is not clear. In Canada, for example, if you own a house, you own the land. And what does that mean exactly? For example, if an airplane flies over your land, you don't own that area, and you don't own what's underneath the land either. Somebody finds gold or something there, it's not yours. So this is a legal question. Take this quick example of ownership, just one example, but in the West in the past, and they still maybe do this, they brand, apparently they do it with nitrogen now, so it doesn't really hurt the cattle, but they brand it, so then in this case the cows can wander freely, and each rancher knows who owns the cow by the brand, and they respect that. It's a tradition. I guess now they probably use microchips. Or they tag them in some way. This is all evidence of some kind of a method of excludability, so you can identify, this is mine, don't touch it. Just as an example of this too, think of barbed wire. One of the advantages of barbed wire, the reason it was invented again in the 19th century, was to be able to fence out a particular area, and then the animals would stay in that area so they wouldn't wander free. Going back thousands of years, one of the reasons that dogs were probably domesticated was for the same purpose, is that they would bark at night if somebody was trying to get in to steal whatever your crops or whatever somebody had. So this is the issue of excludability. Rivalrous, sometimes referred to as rivalry, is a completely different concept, and it involves the notion of whether two people or two or more people can share or use the good or the commodity simultaneously without somebody having less. So, for example, if you go to the cinema or on a large TV, you've got a large TV at home, you're sitting and watching a show, If somebody in your family sits down on the couch or the Chesterfield beside you, they can watch it just as easily as you can, and there's nothing less for you. So this means it's non-rivalrous. Cinema, it's non-rivalrous. A class, several students could be sitting listening to me right now, be simultaneously or not, and it doesn't mean any less for another person. That means it's not rivalrous. There's no rivalry. So, for example, the cinema, one person in a cinema is not rivalrous. Whereas a chocolate bar, it's rivalrous. You can share the chocolate bar with another person, but it means that if you give the person half of it, well, that's less for you. So in that case, it makes it rivalrous. Often, rivalry is a question of degree. So the example of the cinema, this is true if there's only 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 people in the cinema. But at a certain point, the cinema gets full, in which then it would become rivalrous. So, for example, the Metro, Sunday morning at 8 or 9 o'clock, it's not rivalrous. You can have a seat. But of course, if you tried to ride it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a work day, you probably wouldn't get a seat, or you might have to wait. In the very busy place like Tokyo or large cities, then there's people, you have to wait for the next train to come along. A synonym for rivalrous is congestion. So when, for example, they refer to a road that's congested because there's traffic, a traffic jam, the term we would use in economics, we use the word congestion, but we also use the word rivalry. We say the good is the commodity is rivalrous. Some quick terminology here. When we speak about a good that's rivalrous and excludable, we mean pure private good. When it's not rivalrous and it's excludable, we call it a club good. When it's not rivalrous and not excludable, we call it a pure public good. And when it's rivalrous and not, it's called a common resource. Sometimes called a common pool resource. And a club good is sometimes known as a natural monopoly. Again, I'm trying to stick to the pretty much standardized terminology here. Even the term rivalrousness is sometimes referred to as congestion, as I noted. So let's do some quick examples here. A good that's a rivalrous and excludable is a chocolate bar. You can prevent somebody from, somebody might steal it from you, but usually, if you see somebody that's half eaten a chocolate bar, you're not going to take it because you don't want to eat somebody else's chocolate bar. It's rivalrous, of course, because yes, you can share it, but as I say, you have to give up something. The cinema is an example of what's called a club good. It's excludable in the sense that the owner can prevent people from coming in and watching the movie. It is true there can be people that can sneak into the cinema, but I'll exclude that possibility. But it's not rivalrous in the sense that if there's only a few people watching the movie, well, somebody else can join as well. A fireworks display, that's a good that's considered not rivalrous. Many people can watch fireworks display simultaneously, and any individual doesn't see less. It's also not excludable, kind of difficult. I think Montreal has a fireworks competition in the summer. It's kind of difficult to prevent people from watching it because anybody can just watch it from their own apartment if they're close to the downtown. Finally, a common resource, that's a good that's not rivalrous. For example, fish in the ocean. Canada, I believe, has an economic border in the ocean. It goes out about 100, 200 kilometers. Beyond that, in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, well, there's basically anybody who can go out there and catch fish. And it's rivalrous in the sense that one fish less in the ocean, that's one fish less for anybody else. That's what the sense of rivalrous is, but it's not excludable because nobody can prevent. There's no jurisdiction can prevent them from taking it or using it. Note, very important point here, when we refer to a public good, it doesn't mean that it's state provided or government provided. The notion of public here has nothing to do with the state. Same with private. It doesn't mean that it's private individuals. This is just the terminology we have in economics. So a pure private good specifically means a good that's rivalrous, excludable. And a pure public good means a good that's not rivalrous, not excludable. It's the nature of the good, and again, depending on the laws and customs, traditions, and so on. So, for example, in Canada, healthcare is state provided, but in economics, we consider it a pure private good. It's rivalrous in the sense that when you're seeing a medical doctor, nobody else can be seeing the doctor at the same time, so that makes it rivalrous. It's excludable, well, because the hospital can prevent you from coming in and seeing the doctor. And in fact, they do that. Even if you have a health card, they'll make you wait in the waiting room, so that makes it excludable. So again, excludable also doesn't mean that they can charge you money for it, although that's possible. But excludable just means literally they can choose who can have access to this good. Or, as I say, if you have a chocolate bar, you can choose to share it with a friend, or you can choose not to. That makes it excludable. A street light, for example, is provided by the state and also happens to be a pure public good. But think of a fireworks display. A fireworks display put on by Walt Disney or well, anybody can watch it. That makes it so it could be provided by a private individual. Uh, Goods can move around too. If you go back in time, people typically, it's like 50, 60 years ago, people listened to music on a vinyl disc. A vinyl disc is not rivalrous, it's excludable. Why is it not rivalrous? Well, once the music has been recorded, it's extremely inexpensive to create a new vinyl disc. It costs pennies. A bit like a pharmaceutical drug. It's the same concept. It's very expensive to create the drug, but the pill itself, the ingredients that go into the pill, is pennies. The cost of manufacture is very small. The vaccination with this COVID is an example too, but that means a vinyl disc is excludable because nobody was able to copy these vinyl discs. It took a special machine to do it. Well, then the internet came along and people now have MP3. An MP3 file is not excludable because it's virtually impossible to stop somebody from copying it. But it's not rivalrous either because I can make a copy of a song, give it to you, and that doesn't mean my song doesn't play on my computer anymore. So it's easy to make copies of it. Of course, what's happened recently is Spotify, which is a club good, because it's excludable in the sense that you have to have a password, you may have to pay a subscription service to have access to it, and then you can only listen to the song but it's not rivalrous. Many people, like Netflix, also a club good, many people can listen to the same song on Spotify simultaneously. So these things can move around. So we get back to the issue of the buffalo. It's a common resource. That was the problem with it, is that it was not excludable. Anybody could kill a buffalo at any time. But clearly one less buffalo is rivalrous in the sense that it's not available to somebody else. The environment in general is treated as is considered a common resource. And this is why environmental protection is such a big issue, why economists are so concerned about it. So they're looking at ways, for example, to take something that's like the environment and put it up to treat it like a private good, which means that it would be excludable in somehow. And one way to do that is with a carbon dioxide tax. And that's the motivation behind this. Another way of doing it, which we do in Quebec, is to have a permit system. Incidentally, cattle, that's the branding of cattle, what it's done is, in effect, taken what were previously not excludable and made them excludable. Fish, same story. Iceland does this with its codfish industry. They have a series of quotas for fishermen, so they can't just go and take fish from the ocean. It's restricted in some way, and that makes it excludable. Take this one example of a road. We'll go through all four of them and see how a single commodity like a road can appear under different circumstances under each one of these cases. So if we imagine a toll road, that's a road where what is it, the New York State Thruway, for example, there's a controlled access to the road and you have to pay. Now the payment is less important than the fact that there's controlled access. So a toll road at 5 o'clock, meaning you say it's relatively busy, but you have entry to it, we call that a pure private good. It's rivalrous in the sense that there's other people on the road at the same time. So your car is taking up space, that creates congestion, but it's excludable because they can prevent you from taking the road. The same road, toll road, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, well, it's not rivalrous. There's nobody else on the roads. You can drive as quickly as you want to, but it's a controlled access. So maybe a better example would be like in Europe, where literally you can travel at, I think in Italy, you can drive at 130, 140 kilometers an hour, and you could when there's no other traffic, but it's controlled access. Now, a pure public good would be Décarie at 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, there's no controlled access, so it's not excludable, but there's no rival. There's nobody else on the road, so you could drive except for the speed limit. Finally, if you think of a road in Montreal, Décarie, the Metropolitan at 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a work day, well, then it becomes a common resource. It's not excludable because anybody can get on the road, but it's rivalrous. You're taking up space. And so this is evidence of what we mean by the problem of it. We'll see later, it's called the tragedy of the commons, but this makes it the people complain about it. The sources of many issues is the common resource.